We have all heard the name of Noah, peace be upon him, who was a prophet of Allah sent to his people after, for many generations, they had been worshipping statues that they considered as deities that protected them or satisfied their needs. Surely we know him from a climactic moment in his life when he built, by order of God, an ark to save the believers of his people and the creatures from a terrible flood that people still talk about to this day. No doubt, Allah sent him on such a mission because people had forgotten their Creator. They worshipped images and idols that did not bring them any benefit, nor could they ensure their entry to paradise in the next life. Or we may have heard the name of Abraham, peace be upon him, one of the great prophets of Allah in all of history. He hated the false divinities that his people worshipped. He tried to reason with them, showing them that the sun and the moon are celestial objects that appear and disappear from our sight, that they have no power over the universe, and that Allah is the only one worthy of praise and worship. He wanted to show them the same thing about the idols that they themselves had created with their own hands, but it was in vain, and they wanted to put an end to him. But God miraculously saved him. And who hasn't heard of Moses, peace be upon him? His entire life is like a fantastic story. His childhood, his prophecy, his confrontation with one of the great tyrants of history, the Pharaoh, and how, through many miracles that Allah allowed him to perform, he saved his people, like when he parted the Red Sea and, once safe from the water, his enemies even begged him to ask Allah to save them. Jesus, peace be upon him, one of the most important prophets of Allah, with a miraculous birth, son of Mary, one of the best women of humanity, was sent to the people of Israel to affirm the message of Moses and to invite his people to worship only their Creator without associating partners to him. Through miracles that he performed with God's permission, he managed to demonstrate the truthfulness of his words and leave an indelible mark on history. It is clear from all these examples that God sent different prophets so that people would return to the correct belief, correct their customs and deeds, and so that, by His mercy, they could have the best destiny in this life and the hereafter. Before his departure, Jesus, peace be upon him, informed his disciples of the arrival of the last prophet to come to humanity, Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, from Arabia, who they had to follow to consider themselves Muslims, that is, true servants of Allah. Let us consider the place of Prophet Muhammad's Arabia more than 1400 years ago. It was located between Asia and Africa, and not too far from Europe. It was a geographically central location for the arrival of God's last prophet, who was sent to all humanity and not just his people. Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was born in the city of Mecca in the year 570 of the Christian era. He had, like all prophets, an exceptional lineage, and his parents died when he was just a child. The Arabs of that time lived in tribes, relatively uninfluenced by the great civilizations that surrounded them behind oceans of sand, and while they were generally brave, generous, and true to their word, they had many qualities that were reprehensible. Each tribe claimed sovereignty of the peninsula, and there was no other law than goodness. Human life, property, and honor were constantly threatened. Ignorance had taken hold of them. They had despicable customs. They indulged in adultery, gambling, and drinking. Modesty was rare, and for strange notions of pride, they even buried their daughters alive. They rejected any notion of healthy eating, modest clothing, or hygiene. The Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula were mostly polytheistic. They worshipped stones, trees, idols, and spirits. They vaguely remembered that Abraham and Ishmael, peace be upon them both, were their ancestors, but they knew practically nothing about the God who had created them. It is in that context that Muhammad grew up, but curiously far from all those practices of what is known as Jahiliyyah, the time of pre-Islamic ignorance. During his childhood, he took care of herds of goats with other small Bedouins, and when he became an adult, he dedicated himself to commerce. He was not educated and was illiterate. He never had the chance to be surrounded by wise people because such people did not exist in that region. But even so, he became an unusual person, rarely exceptional because of the qualities that distinguished him from the rest of society. Muhammad never lied, and his people unanimously testified to this. Even those who later became his enemies never accused him of any falsehood, and he earned the nickname Al-Amin, the sincere and trustworthy. So much so that those same enemies deposited their own property in Muhammad's hands for safekeeping. He was the very symbol of modesty. He was born and raised among people who considered drunkenness and gambling as virtues, but he never drank or participated in illicit activities. His people were brutal and uncultured, but he personified the highest manners and the most refined appearance. He helped the widow and the orphan. He was hospitable to travelers. He never hurt anyone, but suffered for others. He never bowed before any creature and did not participate in rituals dedicated to the idols that adorned the Kaaba, that structure built by Abraham and Ishmael in Mecca, considered the first place erected to worship God. He always hated any form of worship other than to Allah. In our next video, we will talk more about the last messenger sent to all mankind, Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, as we look at his incredible prophetic mission. It is our mission to share the message of Allah and His messengers and at the same time learn about Islam, which is submission to God as a way of life. Like this video and subscribe to see all our content. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you all in the next video, and Allah knows best.